some folks in.
Cool.
Hello. Hey, Michaela. Hey, Nicole. Hey, Beth. Hi, Mom. We'll give some folks a minute to get going here.
No problemo.
Hey, Nicole, can you see Michael and I? That work? Why don't you drop in the chat where you're coming from and any organization you're affiliated with? And why don't we start on time, Michael? We I'm thrilled to have you here. I was trying to think about when I first met you, and my best guess was 2010 or 11,
That's probably
uh,
right.
right before we were launching Rocky Mountain Prep. And I had no clue how we got connected or who introduced us.
That's probably right, though. I'm trying to remember. I was assuming it was through Charter School Growth Fund or something like that, but I don't know that that's true. Um,
That could make sense. Maybe Alex Hernandez,
yeah, it could have been Alex or yeah, or one of the folks who was there then. Yeah,
or Eric, and actually Eric signed up to
Eric
join us today.
Shannon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I've known you for a long time. I try to keep up with your the incredible amount of content you create and the deep work. And I've always thought about you as a just like the person who is most knowledgeable and has the biggest breadth on what's happening that's interesting and innovative in education. I'm going to read your full bio so that folks,
Ha.
I think most folks know who you are who have signed up to join us today. But I wanted to read your bio that you strive to create a world where, and I'm going to admit people at the same time, where individuals can build their passions, fulfill their potential, and live a life of purpose through writing, speaking, and work with a portfolio of education organizations. You've been the author of many books, including most recently the national bestseller, congratulations, Job Moves. Well worth a read and a nice frame for how to think about. What I loved about it was both how to find the next step in your career and go on your journey, but also how to support people who are on their journey. And I know we got a lot of practitioners here. And then another book that was instrumental in my thinking about post-secondary education is Choosing College, and how to support young people in their post-secondary educations. You're the co-founder and distinguished fellow at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. You co-host top education podcast Future You and Class Disrupted. You write an excellent Substack newsletter, The Future of Education, which I strongly recommend to folks. Your work has been in the New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, Harvard Business Review, NBC. You're on the board and advisory boards, including Imagine Worldwide, Minerva, and Guild. And in 2014, I thought this was cool. You're an Eisenhower Fellow to study innovation and education in Vietnam and Korea. And Tech and Learning has named you to the list of 100 most important people in the creation and advancement in the use of technology in education. And on top of that, you went to Yale and have a Harvard MBA, and you teach at the Graduate School of Education. So you're a bit of an overachiever, my friend, but it's
Ha.
a real privilege to be with you today.
No, thanks for having me. I see Eric Chan just dropped in, and Eric, we correctly or incorrectly attributed our meeting 15 years ago or so to you. So yeah, no, James, I'm excited. It's going to be fun. Really have appreciated your own journey, frankly, into Willow over the last couple years and following your own writings and musings about how we ought to think about people's next step out of high school and sort of broaden the lens or narrow it in one respect and broaden it in another, shall we say,
Yep.
as we think about how to help people.
Thank you for that. So what I have planned for today is kind of a wide-ranging conversation. As you know, I believe that webinars should be fun and engaging and tr strive to be not boring. And so, in that spirit, I invite folks to drop in the chat where you're calling in from and any organization that you're a part of. And then also to please put your hand up and feel free to come off mute, ask questions in the chat, and just jump into the conversation. And like, let's make this rich for all of us. That being said, I also appreciate that some people are just looking to have lunch quietly and listen along the way. So do what's right for you. Thanks, Michaela. Pleasure to have you here, all the way from Idaho. So you recently wrote, we're going to highlight three of your recent writings. One is predictions for 2025. The second is CTE for all, and the third is job moves. And so we're going to see how we can cover that breadth. But let's start. It's the new year. Most folks are back in their first week of school. What are your predictions as you think about education and the future of workforce for 2025?
Yeah, now I have to remember all my predictions, right?
I've got him
But
here from
yeah,
this one.
yeah, good. Well, so I think, look, there's going to be more attention, I think, on apprenticeships, particularly youth apprenticeships in a variety of careers that we haven't historically thought of as being apprenticeship ready places. So not necessarily the trades, but IT, healthcare, things of that nature. Um, I think there's a bipartisan consensus, actually. One of the rare places that there is in Washington around this, I think, with the election of re-election, I guess, of President Trump, that there will be some push to grow those. Do I think it'll be the year of apprenticeships? I think I'm a little bit more skeptical on that front, but I do think, thanks to some local efforts in places like Indiana and elsewhere, you're going to see an increasing momentum on that. I think that ties into the second thing, which is in general, work-based experiential learning, I think is just growing at all levels of education. Um, I think given just the fast changing nature of work in general, we're realizing we can't codify everything in a textbook. And so having hands-on experience to actually learn stuff is going to be important to keep up with rapid changes. But there's also a good of it because it teaches people what they might like to do or learn more about, right, in their lives, which I think a lot of our education systems actually do a really poor job of doing today. And so I think work-based or experiential learning opportunities, particularly in middle and high school, but also college, will continue to grow. Um, I think thirdly, uh, frankly, more colleges are going to close as more people opt for alternative pathways. We're at peak high school graduation this year, but a lot of people are already saying, hey, this isn't the experience that I want. And they've been opting out of going to college directly out of high school, as you know. And so I think that'll continue to have downward pressure on a bunch of colleges. Where else should we say? I feel like I'm missing an obvious one that was connecting the CTE realm with colleges closing. What did I have there?
Yeah, you've got uh, three others that I have down. One is that education and work are a lot less linear, and I love the
Yeah, let's lean into that for a
yeah.
moment. Yeah, the less linearity. I think that's actually the one constant theme across all the spaces, right? Which is that in K-12 since COVID, really, people, not all people, but a lot of people have realized, hey, the notion of I go to my neighborhood public school and just sort of set it and forget it, people have become much more malleable to it. And you've seen all sorts of behaviors, whether it's education savings account policies in roughly 13 states that mean that a lot of families, they do the neighborhood public school for a couple years, they jump into a micro school, they go into some sort of a la carte experience, they go to a private school, then back to the neighborhood public school in high school and supplement that with some tutoring. You're seeing a lot more fluidity, I guess, through the educational experience. We also know that chronic absenteeism and disengagement completely is still very much there. And so I just think it's like people are not just going to and through the traditional experience. We have to figure that out. But that's also true, frankly, in college and career as well, is that it's not necessarily the case that I go straight from high school to college, 4 years, boom into career. It's certainly not the case that I jump into a career and stay there at one company for the duration, right? That's been evolving faster and faster over time. And so all those things I think become less linear. That has a huge implication, I think, from a policy standpoint. of how do we measure what success looks like in each of these intervals, right? For a long time in high school, it was that which gets students into college and ideally a quote unquote good college. Um, that is a lot harder to figure out when, a student may have had five different schooling experiences, may not go right into college, may come back to college later, might just get a certificate, then go back into a job and then get the degree much later. We know men in particular, boys in particular, take longer to complete than girls in many cases. And so, like, how do we think about this? I think is very difficult at the moment. What do we have next? What are the other two?
Um, Maybe related to that, skills-based hiring. I
Yeah,
enjoyed this one because I share some of your skepticism around
yeah.
how
I,
impactful this would
I,
be.
I've kind of been in the closet on this one, I guess, for a while. Because like on so skills-based hiring, our friends Byron and Gust Opportunity at Work and others have
Mhm.
been pushing for this for some time. And on the one hand, I'm very sympathetic. Like hiring based on degree alone is in an interesting way quite discriminatory, and it excludes large parts of the population who historically have not gotten degrees or had access to degrees for any number of reasons. And it's not a great proxy for ability to do a job well in many cases. Experience is actually a far better one. And so the answer has been like skills based hiring and sort of the argument you can get critical thinking and communication as well as technical skills from a variety of pathways. Let's start to absorb those. And I guess my fear of that is that we make it overly technocratic in a sense of like, oh, you have to have evidence of critical thinking, which ignores that critical thinking is often very domain specific and built on knowledge, number one. Number two, frankly, employers like really don't know what they mean when they toss around those buzzwords. I'm not sure educators often do either. Um, and three, employers in particular do not know the skills at the heart of their most successful employees. So you're asking them to now select on a bunch of things that they don't really understand, can't define, or not common across, and don't actually know which ones result in good performance and select on those. That doesn't seem super wise to me. And I guess my takeaway from the Job Moves book was to really reinforce a view of mine, which is why don't we just like look at the tasks or the experiences or the work someone actually does on a day to day, week to week basis and say, like, do we have evidence that this candidate has done that somewhere in some similar setting? And that is evidence that, if they get 70, 80% of these things and can show evidence of it, maybe this could be a really good fit for them. Um, and I think, frankly, that creates a uh, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but an impetus for schools actually to lean in on more experiential based learning
Mhm.
actually in the curriculum then as a result to give students opportunities through projects, internships, externships, et cetera, right? The opportunity to build and evidence uh,
Yep.
uh, the capability on those experiences that might give them more reps to get hired into these roles. And then we can let the educators worry about, okay, what are the skills underpinning doing those tasks or experiences well, and how to like we build someone up into that. I think that's a very appropriate thing for education to worry about.
Yep.
I'm just not convinced employers are going to do it well.
Yeah. I think that all resonates for me. My skepticism comes from the fact that with all of this energy, effort, and awareness, effectively employer behavior has not shifted at all in their hiring practices,
That's
except
true.
in the very tightest of labor markets. And so I think it's a lot of hand waving right now, unfortunately. And it makes it difficult to think about it from the education practitioner side. To your point, how do we best prepare young people to be successful, especially with that first job? It's easy to look experiences when you're mid-career, but for that first entry-level job, it's tougher.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that actually relates to the last one, I think, which is the role of AI
Hmm.
um, in finding jobs, which is to say, at the moment, for a long time, employers have used AI in their applicant tracking systems to screen and frankly filter out candidates who didn't match the keywords right
Yep.
in job
Yep.
descriptions. And increasingly individuals are using AI to actually tune their resumes and cover letters and automatically apply to hundreds of jobs online at the click of a button. I do have, a friend who got a job that she didn't even realize she had applied for because the AI had done it for her, right? Um, my instinct is that actually that's going to be the rare use case. That
Hmm.
what's really going to happen is that employers are going to be deluged by more online applications. They're not going to believe them. Already, I would argue that their job postings are sort of looking for unicorns, and the AI is going to represent a bunch of people that look like superheroes for those unicorn job positions. And I think hiring managers are going to say, I don't know if I believe what's being represented online. And I think they will turn to their network, who they know, to find trust, go through trusted sources to find people to do the job based on what they say, like, here's evidence that I can do this.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think as AI plays a bigger role in automating what I would call some of the worst parts of the job market and sort of the education to career bridging, in the name of efficiency, I actually think that means that social capital will become more, not less important.
That that insight really stuck with me when I read it for the first time, and makes sense to me in kind of a overwhelming context of choice and not a lot of clarity around what's quality or not, which is a good analog to how I think about students trying to decide post-secondary.
Mhm.
How do you cut through the noise most effectively, and relying on your network and the people you know is tried and true.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, we can get into the work you're doing there as an easy bridge, but I do think obviously data is a useful filter on, like, these are colleges, for just as an example, right, that have sizably uh, outperform for students like you. And then actually, though, having trusted people at those schools to actually understand what the day-to-day experience is actually like, and how does that mirror on what gives you energy and what motivates you and what fit looks like from your perspective, or maybe honestly even better to help you eliminate choices like, oh wow,
Mhm.
that's definitely not for me. Is, I think, a really valuable thing that people are not taught to lean on nearly enough as they navigate pathways.
Yeah, we think a lot about, for what it's worth, like creating sandboxes of options that are likely to be a good fit and likely to be high quality, or from the best available data we have are high quality, and to try and reduce the noise in these contexts. And then it's putting young people don't make these decisions one on one with an app or a tool or a computer. So it's like putting that conversation in those resources into the conversations with their friends, with their trusted peers, and their mentors or family members to make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's right. And all these, I think what it underscores, right, is all these big inflection points in our lives where we make choices. They should be inherently social, to
Mm-hmm.
help us improve what we're doing, particularly with experience services or experience goods where you haven't done it. So having people to help guide you or tell you what it's like is actually extremely valuable.
Right, right. India, thanks for putting a question in the chat. Actually, it was just to me. Do you mind coming off onto video and asking? And if not, I'll happily represent your question if not.
No, I am. Thank you so much for calling on me. It is a pleasure being here. I basically just wanted to see clarity in regards to your comment about James, maybe those buckets that you're putting certain schools in to recommend for students and families. I love that Michael is using the verbiage around best fit.
Mm-hmm.
But I was curious to know if it's based on the school's graduation rate or maybe those competencies connected to multicultural services.
Yeah, great question. So the best available data we have, which is I wish was richer and better, but the way we do it is we project a personalized return on investment for each student around the programs that they're considering, and we use a fit algorithm. So like, what are the number of factors that they've told us that they're interested in? Everything from small school to big school, bachelor's program, or only what we call professional programs. So effectively everything that's not a bachelor's, which is a wide range of opportunities. And then we have 220,000 different programs in our database, and we will use the fit criteria to sort that list to a much smaller list. And then we'll use the projected ROI, which is based on where we can get it, the actual cohort of that program's salary outcomes 6, 8, 10 years later after starting. And then the completion rates, and we can look at completion rates, whether you're first generation or not, whether you're a student from a low income household or not. And we put all of that together to create, here are some strong programs that we think you're going to be interested in based on what we told you, that we project having a positive return on investment for your, honestly, like the biggest decision of your life, almost always to date.
Love that salary outcome piece. If only I had that many moons ago. Michael, would you like to add in? Would you like, especially in education, but Michael, would you like to add anything? Thank you, James, for that.
I mean, I think the way James has articulated it makes a ton of sense, because it's basically right helping you as the individual understand what are likely my outcomes. And I think often in education we too narrowly think about, well, we generally think about inputs, right? So if you look at US News rankings or stuff like that, they're looking largely at uh, teacher to student ratios and things of that nature. Interesting, but doesn't tell me if I'm likely to graduate. That's an output measure. And then I think the outcome one is the real one that we need to be looking at. And at some level, to your point, India, like not everything is going to be strict ROI. If it was, we would just tell people to put money into the stock market. Just to pick an index fund, it's going to probably outperform your returns from college. But I want to at least know that it's not likely a negative return and have some sense of the nuance, right? Like if I want to go into a business program for kids like me coming from this background, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where is it most likely to pay off? And what's the cut of, 4 to 5 schools? And then I'm going to sit there and ideally have some conversations. James mentioned one of those might be at a small school, one of them might be at a large school, one might be at urban, et cetera. I might actually have some very clear priors that me being in a rural environment without the network, small, et cetera, that's a deal breaker off the get-go, right? And so I'm going to take all of those off the list. What are the couple that I'm left with? I think that's the sort of things that we ought to be doing, just so that people have much more information on the front end.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, India, for modeling what we hope this is kind of an open conversation and rich dialogue. We're not a huge group, so let's take advantage of that. Thank you. Michael, I wanted to double click on apprenticeships and kind of alternative quality next steps that young people can take in their careers, and maybe bridge this to the career exploration prediction. Um,
Yeah.
what's been the barrier that's holding it back? There's a ton of buzz, there's a ton of funding. Why isn't it bigger and more impactful yet?
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on. Number one, the funding has largely been for the establishment of programs,
Mhm.
but not actually for hiring individuals. And what I think, if you study this in Europe, where apprenticeships are much more represented, for example, what you realize is that companies actually tend not to be the ones, right, to take on these apprenticeships, that there are these intermediary organizations that sit in between that both hire and train, but effectively act like a temp agency, right, to place someone in a job for the year or two or whatever it is. Um, and public policy, rather than like helping a community college create an apprenticeship program, actually driving funding to offset some percentage, right, of the salary that you're going to be paying a young person.
Mhm.
um, so dollars are literally following students and paying for the outcome of successful employment.
Yep.
uh, would I think unlock a lot more growth in this. What I think we know is that companies are super reticent on the youth apprenticeship side
Mhm.
to take that gamble. Intermediaries are not seeing that as the biggest opportunity because they're the most unproven
Mhm.
people. And so there isn't really an infrastructure outside of a couple, Trident Technical College in Charleston, South Carolina. They have a lot of
Mhm.
youth apprenticeships. but we're still talking. I think the numbers are in like the low hundreds.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's just like there's not a real funding or policy apparatus to support this and de-risk it in the ways that I think it would need to be for this to be a viable um, pathway into the market for folks.
Yep.
I think the growing interesting one is apprenticeship degrees,
Hmm.
which sort of marries these two things, and that allows you to get rid of the choice, I guess I'd say, right, between the work-based exclusively with some training versus college exclusive
Yep.
choice. And Reach University and then Western Governors University recently acquired Craft.
Yep.
And Tennessee has done some stuff in this space, and teaching seems to be the biggest area where this is taking off at the
Yep.
moment. This essentially, you're teaching in a school as a parapro,
Right.
or you're working in the cafeteria or something like that, and the district identifies, hey James, you'd be an awesome teacher. I see how you work with kids.
Yep.
And you're like, great, but I can't stop this job as a paraprofessional or whatever else, because if I do, I'm foregoing income that I
Right.
need, and I can't pay for a program. And so we can actually use Pell dollars, federal financial aid, potentially workforce dollars, et cetera, braid them together to allow you to continue to make an income. The practicum is your homework. So your
Yep.
time in the classroom is your homework. And then you have like one online class a night that's your class.
Yep.
And you can be getting a degree to get that teacher credential while you're actually still working in the school.
Yep.
And by the way, the work is much more connected to what you ultimately hope to do afterwards. So I do think apprenticeship degrees may be a very promising path forward. My instinct, frankly, is that we're going to have to see a lot of new institutions come into the market that do that from whole cloth. I think it's going to be very hard to convince traditional teacher colleges and places of that nature to sort of change their stripes.
Yeah. Funny note, I accidentally set up a teacher prep program that was an apprenticeship degree in the end. At first, it was apprenticeship plus license, our
Huh.
Rocky Mountain Prep Teaching Fellows program. And then we were able to, with Relay, able to add on a degree program to that. And it was a great talent. We needed it for a talent play in order to operate our model, which is a little more innovative and talent hungry than kind of a traditional model. And so
Well,
it was a
actually,
great. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, as an aside on that, I do think charters are the place where we've seen the most innovation on that, because to your point, like when you have an innovative model like what you've set up, the teachers coming from the traditional colleges of teaching around you are unlikely to be preparing them in the way that you need them to be able to teach right in your environment. And so I think it's not a coincidence that uh, certainly Uncommon Kip, why can't I think right now? And one other that came together for Relay right in the New York
Achievement first.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
thank
maybe
you.
it's AF.
Achievement
Yeah.
First. Yep. Aspire in the Bay Area, right?
Yep.
High Tech High Summit. You all like. I think it's not a coincidence that we've seen new teacher preparation programs with degrees arise in places where the charter networks have said we need to integrate backward in some meaningful way because this is not getting done for us.
Yeah. And to say the quiet part out loud, to be clear, the biggest driving factor of that was not just more humans. It was the quality of teacher candidates were not being prepared. It was a very low quality candidate coming out of the teacher prep programs, um,
Yep.
holistically. And so that's also a good plug if you want to go deeper, anyone who's joined us in apprenticeship degrees, Mallory is our next Purposeful Pathways conversation guest next month. And she's the founder of Craft and of Reach University, and has been a force in this exciting space.
Yeah, and she's terrific. So definitely
Yeah.
tune into that.
Um, we were talking about apprenticeships, obviously, like put your demand side hat on. Like, what do students, young people, how do they, if they're interested in this, how should they be thinking about best connecting and understanding local apprenticeship opportunities?
Yeah, well, it's hard, right? Because there's not a ton of them for young people, but as a result, there's not a lot of data infrastructure
Yep.
around it either. So I think this is where building social capital and talking to people and identifying different pathways and then seeing what possibilities are to get into them that are alternative is so critical. And it's why conversations like they can't lean on their high school counselors in many cases
Yep.
because the counselors have been so conditioned for the college or bust sort of mentality that they struggle to advise in this. I think you really have to get to the professionals in the space you're interested in entering and have the conversation to see what alternative pathways are there.
Yep.
It seems clear to me that a lot of students are increasingly doing that, at least based on the numbers going into trades and career technical education, as opposed to college, right
Yep.
after graduating. Um, but I think to get a richer sense of what's possible at the moment, unfortunately, it's networks. I think in the longer run, we hope folks like you scale the infrastructure to better connect people to different possibilities that have that productive long run ROI. And I love that you do it over 6, 8, 10 years, not just like a year out. Um, because I think the other part of this is there are short term training programs that have a modest initial boost, but then deposit you in effectively a dead end pathway that has
Right.
no mobility upward from there.
Yep.
There was a great bit of research years ago that Burning Glass and Harvard Business School did on middle skills jobs,
Hmm.
which they defined as ones that had that continuing up ramp, if you will, right, of pathway. And so I do think you need to be looking at that as not just, okay, I got into the entry level job and now I'm stuck here.
Yep.
What's the next step out of that that has continued salary growth?
Yeah. A favorite entry level job of ours 2 years ago was medical billing and coding and the CompTIA A plus certificate for IT essentials. And both of those jobs are my best understanding at this point is being AI'd away quickly. And so we're gonna have to keep up with with that pretty aggressively over the next 5 years as well.
I hadn't realized that. It makes sense because I think a lot of entry level jobs are the ones that most at risk,
Yeah.
um, which I think is going to put pressure on K-12 education to actually up level students even more so that they can come in with those experiences and take a take what used to be sort of your second job in a field that's going to become the new entry level potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I fear you're right, and I worry about the K-12's capacity to innovate at scale and adapt at scale, obviously.
Yep, agreed.
Um, Brett, would love for you to jump in.
Hi,
Good to see you.
everybody. Good to see you too. I guess my question is about access, but also try to make this succinct. Is just as the pendulum is swinging back towards CTE and kind of, I think we're being a bit more intentional about it and like making it, you know, not trade, not just trade, and it's kind of more all inclusive. We're still seeing, at least I'm seeing with high school students, the ones that are like prepared, the ones that like know what they want, already have like passion, interest, this sort of thing, motivation, all these skills that colleges and apprenticeships and organizations are looking for. Well, how are we working with the students that maybe aren't there yet that would like super benefit from an apprenticeship and this experience, this exposure, but they don't have all the skills yet, or even they don't know what they don't, we don't know what we don't know. So
Yeah.
kind of that piece of it.
I think it's a great question, and maybe stay on video for a moment just to make
Okay.
sure we answer it correctly. But I give you the full answer. My instinct is that I've become quite persuaded by American Student Assistance's work, ASA's work, to much earlier, middle school, even elementary school, but certainly middle school, expose students to learning about work in a range of areas and understanding both how it connects with what drives their energy, what they are good at, what their capabilities are, and then being able to have agency to make the choices that you're describing in an equitable way. So rather than what we used to do with Voc Tech, where we would track the students the students actually being empowered with an understanding of what it takes to be successful, how it lines up with their interests, and the things that drive their energy. So and the information, frankly, that James is describing around salaries, et cetera, so they can make some informed choices about this. The thing I would add is, I think from our book, Job Moves, teaching students and frankly all individuals how to make the trade-offs between things like, of course, I want the job that's going to pay $250,000, but do I want to take organic chemistry and pass it? There's a trade-off there, right? And so helping people sort of navigate those trade-offs with more intentionality up front, I think is going to be really important. Not sure I'm fully answering, but that's where I'd start.
I mean, I thank you. I think that yes, and is more, and maybe this is more in the weeds, and maybe this is James, where, I just think that it's the how and how do we do it. And maybe this is, I mean, you're a big a peer thinker. And so I'm thinking more in like,
I see. Yeah.
like how are we with schools? I'm in a charter network where we really, Friendship has done a lot with apprenticeships, and the city works in DC, and we're doing like, it's cool and great. And the average GCPS high school student maybe not get like, or even middle school student, like how, kind of like, how do we do it at scale? Or what are some of the things, like, what is like the thing we can focus on that even the most like tired, overwhelmed counselor can implement, or something that we can like, I don't know. I'm just looking for maybe like the magic thing that doesn't exist. But
I
Right?
Yeah, I
Oh, sorry. Go
mean,
ahead, Michael.
go ahead. No, go ahead. You go first, James. I have a couple thoughts, but go.
Yeah, I think I purposefully try and position myself between Michael, who's here, and you, who's like working with students and counselors and managing that team at Friendship. Is to like, how do we connect these big picture ideas to actual to practice? And not to be dismissive, I know, Michael, you care a lot about
No, no,
practice.
no, no. Go for it.
So hopefully that's not offensive. Um, this is a big aha we've had recently in talking to folks like yourself is a core problem is that students don't understand why what they're doing today matters for their future. And so why should they give a um, fill in the blank about whatever they're doing if they don't understand how that connects? And um, the right delivery mechanism for that is not the counselor, if there is a counselor that has 400 or 500 students on their caseload. And so we have gone, and this has been when I started 2 years ago working on Willow and what we're now thinking about as a student success platform for high school that does career and post-secondary exploration. We were not thinking as deeply about career exploration and helping make sure that students have a student-friendly way to understand what they're good at and not, and what careers are out there that might be a good fit. Michael, very early on in this journey with Willow, shared with me some research that's stuck with me ever since. It's easier for students to know what they don't like, and it's just as valuable to know what they don't like. And so we really lean into that. And then secondly, how I'm using, help me find a better metaphor, but my metaphor for this right now is, if you had a rich aunt who actually knew how to work the system, what would that rich aunt be telling that ninth grader to do and to focus on and to care about, and also what not to care about and do? Okay, because you want to become a nurse or a doctor, you need to have at least a 3 or a 3.5 GPA. You need to get your best grades in your bio class. You need to sign up for AP Bio and get on the AP track. And you need to do a job shadow and join the biochem club at your school. And so, like, these are the 5 things to do. Worry less about the other things. And so we are building AI right now and goal setting tool, or using our AI coach and goal setting tools right now to help students craft that and to give feedback at scale of like, this goal is not very good or sharp, and this is on track. Last point there, and then I'll shut up. Like, and then who's doing the follow-up work? When you get a C minus in your first semester of bio, who's saying, hey, you're not on track for this goal anymore. Do you want to work to get back on track, or do you want to think about what are other adjacent possibilities that align well?
Um, I'll try to go a little bit more down as well. But first, I love Friendship Public Schools, so good to see you. Good to meet you. Uh, so I'll say like six things that I laid out here, none of which I think are magic or silver bullets. And my answer is a little depressing, I think, also at the end. But one, like some at public schools and other places do expeditions, right? Where they actually have periods of time during built into the year where you are actually in the community doing work with employers. I think that's really important. Um, there's different variations of it, big picture learning, which I confess, like I didn't fully understand it a decade ago. I've become much more enthralled with how, 2, 3 days a week, right? Students are actually in jobs
Hmm.
with folks. So I think that's important. And there's a rotation of that. It's not like you're on this track. Um, Second, I think like to James's point, I don't think this is going to live in the counselor. I don't think it's going to live in the career office in college. I think it has to be curricular. Um, I'm really intrigued by the world of work that Cajon Union School District in California created, which exposes students starting in elementary through middle school to 50 some odd different careers, where they actually like get very tangible um, awareness of what it looks like, how much people make, what the day to day and week to week are like, and then actually connect that to what James said of like, and this is where it connects in the curriculum, so you understand the relevance as you go through. Beable, which is a reading software product that is built on top of World of Work, I think is another one that's interesting there. Um, Third, I would name I do think it's going to take some redesign of schooling, right? To like create the time and space for some of these things, and we're gonna have to figure out what are we cutting out as we do so, or where's the yes ands. Um, I would say fourth, like maybe it's not everyone going into uh, CTE programs per se, but like CAPS, for example, which is a model where, right, like there's a CTE center. I can attend my traditional district for the first half of the day, and then I go into this CTE school, right, for the second half of the day where I have a very clear externship of some sort. Maybe that's the sort of capacity we need in districts or other places to do this. Um, and then I think, alternative schooling models are going to be really important in this that sort of bust out of this to rethink some of these things. Um, and then, like, I guess the sixth thing I would say is like the depressing piece, which is well, actually, let me give an optimistic one for the sixth one. I think there's going to be some direct to student stuff, ideally, that gets out of schools completely to do this. That's what ASA's bet has been in terms of what they've funded. But then I guess the seventh thing that's more depressing is like it's hard to move a ship, right? We know that this has been the work of ed reform for as long as we've all been in it, I think. And like we can all point to our examples. And then we can all point to the examples where it didn't scale beyond, you know, any given thing. I don't have a great example of that. I do think our model of scale tends to be limited in education in the sense that we tend to think of it like software scaling. Like I'm going to do exactly what James did in Denver and like replicate that everywhere else, blind to the fact that every community is somewhat different and the needs of students are different. And instead, I think we ought to be thinking about it like civil engineering, which is to say the principles undergirding exposure to careers are probably the same across geography, but how I put that in with different communities and given different regions actually is very different in the same way that laws of physics don't change from locality to locality, but building a bridge in snowy Boston compared to windy, earthquake prone San Francisco is actually very different. I don't know, Brett, if that's helpful, but
No, it totally, y'all are very, very helpful. And I guess my last piece, and I'm going to be quiet, is that we also have to like make it so that we can give it time. I feel like in ed reform and just in general in
a
the
very
world we
point.
live in this country is like, what was STEM? Now it's STEAM. Now it's apprenticeship. Like it's just everything is like, what's the buzzy thing of
Hmm.
what feels like the year? And so I just hope this sticks a little bit.
Yeah, we are very fad driven, which is not helpful to our students. I agree with that.
I think, and Bailey from TNTP is on the call, and she was our guest last month and has done all the work around paths to opportunity. the coalescing and and interest in economic and social mobility feels like the right North Star for us all to be pointing at as a bunch of separate systems. As Brett was asking that question, Michael, it struck me that effectively the education system is facing an innovator's dilemma, and they really struggle to innovate out of.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the models we create, right, are extremely sticky, and to do fundamentally new things and shed the old, is incredibly hard, which I think is the logic for alternative schooling models and spaces, right, to emerge. And um, one wish I guess I would have for the public at large is, when one of these alternative schooling models appears and like a subset of students choose to go into them, we aren't incredibly dismissive or see it as not public education or something like that, right? Like we're more encompassing of what that can look like, and realizing, different strokes for different folks, and there's reasons for that. But the flip side is true too, and I'll just use one example. Like Waldorf school, I do believe, provides an enormously valuable education for certain kids in certain circumstances. And like if you do come from a household that is not reading rich and teaching you phonics, I think it's pretty dangerous. um, because of their stance on reading, right? And so I just think we have to have less one size fits all and more like, okay, let's understand where the kid's coming from. What do they need, to your point, to advance toward this North Star of being able to be in a world in which they are economically independent and can live some life of choice.
Yep. Yep. This is a good pivot and segue to make the case. You have made the case for CTE for all. And, you made it on the backs of some failed for all movements. So would love for you to claim the CTE for all mantle.
Yeah, sure. So, this sort of plugs into what Brett was observing around fads, which is that we all love fads in education, whether it's college for all, CS for all, you can name it. There's been plenty. Um, and my argument basically was like those all withered on the vine because they were inappropriate for different reasons, right? So CS for all, like the notion of building up a huge teaching force that could somehow do this, was pie in the sky at best. And unclear that like every kid needed exactly sort of these backgrounds. College for all, I think we've seen like that there's some really unfortunate outcomes of pushing kids into pathways that are very unlikely to be productive or even graduate from, in many cases. And so there's a lot of harm that comes from that. And I found it like a weird thing in some of Rod Shetty's work, for example, where he says like around social capital, access to certain people actually lifts other people's fortunes. And therefore, like, we need to somehow get more people to these higher ed institutions, which are very few in number and have fixed seats. And so like it's very unclear to me like how that sort of that theory of action works, if you will. I think the argument for CTE for all is not that everyone should not go to college and go directly into a trade. It's more simply that we need to have exposure so that people can make meaningful choices in the pathway, as we've been talking, between, college immediately, college later, career right now, which career, which interest, and so forth. The fact that people can graduate right now and sort of, I'm going to apply to a business major in a college because business sounds interesting, but I don't actually really know what that means or how it aligns with the things that really make me tick. I think are incredibly crazy, and we just need to be building. I think CTE is part of the curriculum, is a useful way to build in individuals much more agency, metacognition, and awareness of what pathways are out there and how they can contribute to them.
Thank you. And then Bailey, great to
Yeah.
see you. Do you have a
Hey,
new little
it's great to
person
see
in your
you.
life?
I know I still am growing a new little
Okay,
person.
okay.
So here he is. 33 weeks yesterday, and I was really
Oh,
sad
wow.
when he didn't come early over the break. But Michael, I love one of the things we've been talking about some at TNTP within the context of CTE for all is like can you reclaim and redefine the term CTE, or do we actually need to talk about this differently because CTE carries so much baggage of what it was and honestly what it still is, as I think about, at least in the community where I live, the CTE programs that we're really proud of are not leading kids to jobs or careers that are likely to sustain their families. How do you think about that?
I think
Do
it's a
you,
great point. Yeah, I think it's
you're
a great
nodding,
point.
so you think about it some.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have the answer. I think it's a great point. I think what we've all settled on, right, is voc ed is certainly not the frame for the reasons that you said. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Like, if, I'm in Massachusetts, the CTE schools here are actually highly coveted and
Mm,
competitive and actually discriminatory against low income racial minorities that can't get into them, which is like the reverse, right? You're in Tennessee, I think. So, uh, and New Jersey, I think, is much the same as another example. That's not universal either. So I don't know the answer to it, but I think it's a really good point. I think when we used the phrase in that Ed Next article recently, CTE for all, I couldn't think of a better frame for it at the moment. But it frankly might be like work-based learning or something much more generalized, to your point, that doesn't connote trades. I mean, this is the problem with apprenticeships too, is it carries a lot of baggage also. And people are trying to put a lot more in that container right now. And I don't know if everyone is sort of ready for that. Not an answer, but I think it's actually language does matter as we communicate ideas. Sometimes we want to put boxes around things. And actually, I think sometimes we probably shouldn't put boxes around things because it creates a punching bag that people can push back against in some negative way. So I don't know.
We're talking about it right now as career connected learning, of which CTE could be a
I
part
really
for
like that.
kids.
Yeah.
But I think it's so hard because so much of the funding is Perkins/CTE funding. So I feel like we're trying to.
Well, we face this problem in the mastery learning or competency based learning movement too, right? Which is that competency is the word used in policy. Um, I would argue that creates a bunch of negative challenges there as well. And so I think the same thing is true here. I actually prefer career connected learning just as when you said it that way, like quick blush, I was like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. Um, it may be that that's the phrase we use, but then when you define the technicalities of the program, you use CTE so that you can be eligible for funding. And we have to dance a little bit in translation. And be malleable and give people some grace when they're using different words for different contexts. But I quite like that notion of career connected learning because that seems like the non-negotiable, and then the how and how deep sort of could vary depending on circumstance.
thanks, Bailey. Um, we probably have time for about one more question. I'm going to sneak in a last one too. How, as you were writing job moves, audience is different than a lot of your other work. Basically, not us educators here. But I'm quite positive that you were thinking a lot about the education system and educators, and you've alluded to different ways throughout this conversation. But in your mind, like, what are your learnings from job moves that you hope educators and practitioners will take away?
Yeah, I think the process we came up with, and you're right, like to be clear, the book is written for someone who's held one job, right? At least one job,
Mm-hmm.
all the way through retirement. But I think there's a very easy crosswalk that you and others have already started to make to creating other ways to use the 9 steps that we outlined to help students start to identify, where do I draw energy from? What am I good at? What do I want to become better at? Have a growth mindset about their agency in making choices around pathways. And then I think importantly, being able to learn how to use prototypes of divergent prototypes for what you could do in the future as a way to collect information against the reflection you've done, as a way to build your network, and then as a way to make trade-offs as you make choices as you actually go in there. And I think there's a big statement in the book that there is no perfect job on every dimension. Every job for every individual has some element of suck in it, things that we don't like. The question is, can we more intentionally choose what we're going to trade off on so that we get all the benefits that are most important to us at a given point in time? And if we can teach kids to have that superpower over time and focus much more on the doing than the being, like the title of what they are, I think will help people land in much more purposeful places over time that are consistent with what makes them tick and where they can do their best work. I will say, by the way, you can disagree on this one. I think I'm generally like a 40 to 50,000 foot thinker on the education space. The Job Moves book gets pretty deep in the weeds tactically of like, what does this coaching process look like? So much so that we wrestled with like, is it just a workbook or is this really a book? And I do think that there's some easy adaptations that I hope educators make to it to make something more robust for the K-12 space.
Absolutely. We're building curriculum right now that is complementary with our platform. And so I read it with a lot of interest and thinking about like what are the different exercises that are valuable to students as they're thinking about this. We have about 4 minutes left and just love to continue to open it up. What are questions that popped up for you? What a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Michael. Great to start the year off with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love this term real world learning or market value assets
Yep.
that India popped in the chat there. I'm pulling these in, career connected learning and those two right now. So thank you. By the way, these conversations are also valuable for me. Sorry, this is a total aside and it's going to take up oxygen, but like I had this big wrestling where like a few years ago, I was getting deeper with Guild and some companies in the space. And it was sort of this aha moment of like, I actually think my unique value add is sitting at the call it 20 to 50,000 foot level in the education space. But the only way that's useful is if I'm in dialogue with people right on the ground so that you can be like, CTE doesn't land for these reasons. Better if we talk about it this way, and then I can adjust and right, we have this iteration together. So hopefully we can all row in the same direction.
Awesome. Brett, you pop back up for us. You have a question?
Well, I was wondering if anyone else, because I already talked a lot. So if anyone else had anything to say, but
Michaela, can you come off? Thanks, Brett. Can you come off on video? I see your good question in the chat.
Hi. I have a child at home with me, so I'm sorry if you hear any extra noises in the background. My question is around financial literacy, teaching that at a much younger age than schools traditionally do, so that as they grow older, they're better poised to make job decisions around what they would like to do and what interests them, rather than trying to survive economically in a world that isn't built for that.
I think it's a great point. James, you probably have some concrete viewpoints on it. So maybe I'll be super quick on my thoughts and then turn it to you. Obviously, financial literacy for all is becoming a thing. I will say my one nagging worry, to be super candid on it, is all the research consistently shows we'd be better off just helping people learn math. Because financial literacy is something you forget very quickly unless it's in context of a decision you have. That said, I think your point is a good one, which is what if we taught math and embedded some pretty basic cornerstones of when it would be relevant in financial literacy so that these are terms and concepts that people could then like come back to, right, as they're making these decisions. Much later, and my thinking was pulled on this, observing some cousins of my kids over the last couple breaks who have gone through some financial literacy courses and hearing how they were talking about and using the terms and explaining it. There is something there. And so I think if we could embed it and sort of connect the math maybe more early on to some practical stuff, that could be really interesting to your point. James?
My short answer is yes. And my lens and context is as students are getting ready for career, like understanding careers and understanding what post-secondary programs set them up for success towards those careers. And we've got 4 cornerstones of like what our product and curriculum we think needs to do. One is like understanding yourself, your identity, your strengths and weaknesses. The second is understanding what careers are out there that might be a good fit and ones that are not. Uh, Next is like making high school relevant and successful, and then making a good choice, not a known bad choice about your next step after high school. We stole from Summit concrete quality next steps. I had quality, but concrete next steps is how Summit talks about it. And then financial literacy is a part of that. Like it's the biggest financial decision of students' lives. They need to have the context to do so. We hear feedback all the time, like, is ROI needed? It's like complex. Our counselors don't really understand it yet. Our students don't either. And we keep coming back to like, yes, let's teach that explicitly and teach it well and deeply as we set students up for success. We're at time. I'm committed to ending on time. Thank you for joining us. Big round of applause for Michael. Thank you for all of your good work in the space and pushing all of our thinking today.
No, and thank you guys. I appreciate what you all do every day for kids. So thank you.
Awesome. Take care. Happy Thursday, Friday Eve. Talk soon.